So when I came across this concept of multi-solving, it really helped.
Oh, right. That's the word for this thing that I've been looking for to find the best possible solutions to the challenges that we face.
It's an old concept. Giving it a new word, a new twist can shine a new light on something. But back then we called it adaptive management.
I like the idea of an ecosystem as sort of a metaphor for what multi-solving can do to our framing.
Regeneration could be seen as a multi-solution.
What I see as a real opportunity is the opportunity for jobs.
I think if we were to use this approach, it would be a really fantastic way of looking at it.
In the attempt to solve tough problems, the odds are high that no matter how smart you are or how hard you try, you won't make progress working on your own or even by working with people who think the way you do.
Thanks for joining Climate Forum, and thanks for helping us discover multi-solving this month. With respect to the theme tonight, we're following here, we're really trying to help break down some of the complexity of the climate crisis, and with the help of some friends. But it's kind of a two-parter. So today we're discussing the why of some of the potential climate solutions around housing and social needs. And next month, we're discussing the how of some of these climate solutions that revolve around housing, development, and changing landscapes. So it's Climate Forum, and it's all in keeping with our aim to discuss potential climate solutions here that are relevant to our daily lives in our region, and we do it every third Thursday. And welcome, my name is Lee, and my family and I are settlers here in the traditional territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. And although all of us are meeting virtually, we're all standing on traditional land, in most cases on stolen land. I would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg Nation tonight, the people of the three fires known as the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. And I'd also like to give specific thanks to the Chippewa of Nawash unceded First Nation and the Chippewas of Saugeen, now known together as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, seeing as they're the traditional keepers of this land. And personally, I'm growing more and more aware of the inequality in North America between our Indigenous neighbors and ourselves, and the systemic racism that's here and still exists. But like many of us, I'm still on a journey to understand it. And but to all our Indigenous neighbors here, we at Climate Forum, we respect you greatly. Tonight, as usual, my job is only to host the conversation and to make sure your question doesn't get lost and learn more about climate solutions myself. And you guys are here, you're free to relax, and you can chime in the chat box, which I'm monitoring for questions with the help of my co-host, Jenny Carver. Hi, Jenny.
Hey, welcome everybody. Good to see you. I'm Jenny Carver, one of the regulars, as opposed to guest hosts or panelists that we have here tonight and every third Thursday of the month. So it's such an interesting topic, and I'm actually I've done 4 decades of learning and practice in social work, where there's a lot of acknowledgement of intersectionalities around social determinants of health and race and gender and socioeconomics. But this multi-solving piece, including climate as with benefit to planet, goes beyond benefit to individual and community. And I'm just really looking forward to maybe even some aha experiences tonight as we listen to our panelists and have questions from all of you folks. So I really urge you to ask the tough questions that may help to make some new connections. That's what I'm hoping for tonight as well. So welcome everybody, and look forward to a great conversation.
That's great. I've known about multi-solving, by the way, for about 4 weeks. So just that's why I'm learning more myself. Someone else is going to take the lead tonight, and we'll introduce her in a sec. But I wanted to let you know we're recording, of course. We put all the recordings that are edited for time on the Sustainability Project YouTube channel. So subscribe there, please, and you'll get notified as soon as tonight's recording is up and shareable. And we do this so that we're able to reach many more people. You can always just drop your answer to tonight's audience question in the chat instead. And that question again is, how does multi-solving change the way you can talk about climate change? Now I'm going to hand it over to our guest host for tonight. She's a longtime advocate for sustainable housing, attainable housing, affordable housing. She's well-known resident of Grey Highlands. Don't really need to introduce you. Most of you already know Joyce Hall. So Joyce, is our guest host tonight.
Okay, thanks, Lee. So I came across the concept of multi-solving, and when I did, I found it immediately useful. It was kind of like a word that I'd been waiting for, because it was immediately applicable. And the reason was that I had found myself in a quandary as a climate advocate, feeling that I was out of step with people who had other priorities, and even kind of annoyed, like, don't they get it? You know, like if they're interested in affordable housing or poverty, I was thinking, well, no, you have to put climate change first. And then during the pandemic, when people started talking about a just recovery, I had the same sense, like without a planet, there can't be any justice. But step by step though, and to my delight, I started to notice from the solution end that the same solutions appeared in relation to different problems. John Butler, for example, brought to my attention the report of the Grey County Task Force on Age-Friendly Communities. And when you read that set of recommendations, it could have been written to address affordable housing and also climate. So I thought, well, there isn't really a contradiction here, or there isn't really, you know, like a big problem of prioritizing. So when I came across this concept of multi-solving, it really helped kind of solve that. And in terms of the election, I realized that candidates running don't have to be calling themselves climate candidates or whatever. They don't have to prioritize in that way. They can be considering the whole everything. They don't even have to be balancing as if one is going to be taking away from the other, you know. So I liked the term over, say, co-benefits, because it implies that you can actually engage in planning with strategic intention to actually work across silos for benefits. Instead of saying to an affordable housing advocate, yes, but, I can say yes, and. So I thank Jon for introducing me to the term. So with that, I'll provide a brief overview of the evening. We're going to have two main speakers, Jon Farmer and Kelsey Carriere, and some other surprise special guests in the wings, so wait for that, whom we'll introduce later to comment on how the concept could be helpful to them in their specialty areas. So I just invite you to make use of the chat for questions and comments. And we'll have short Q&A periods after both, after each of Kelsey, Jon and Kelsey's presentations, and the specialty speakers when we bring them on. So I'll hand it over to Jenny now to introduce Jon.
Thanks, Joyce, and apologies for my ground control to Major Tom headphones here. I'm not used to this. It's going to be weird. My speaker was not happy this evening. Jon Farmer, we all know Jon Farmer. I don't know him personally, but he's somebody who's been such an incredible contributor to our community in so many ways. We know that he's a candidate for the Owen Sound City Council, which is excellent. He's a new dad. I got to see him playing with his baby at Summerfolk this summer. And he's worked in so many different roles locally, ranging from gender-based violence programs to arts to facilitation, freelance writing. He's one of those sort of eclectic and Renaissance fellows. He's local. He's born and raised in Owen Sound, which is great. Went to Squamish, BC for university. Wow, that's an amazing opportunity. Who doesn't want to go to Squamish to university? And he's apparently a persistent advocate for lawn bowling, is the word on the street. He's definitely one of our local heroes for change, who doesn't shy away from complex challenges or doesn't shy away from thinking about bold collaborative solutions. So it's great to have you here tonight, Jon, and over to you. And please, folks, put your questions, comments, challenges, ahas into the chat so that we can bring them into the conversation. Over to you, Jon.
Well, thanks for a very generous introduction and for pumping my tires there. Hello, friends. It's good to see you on the internet. Like Jenny said, for those of you I haven't been able to meet, my name is Jon, and I'm really stoked that this conversation is happening. I stumbled across the idea of multi-solving somewhere on the internet. It may have been like a particularly progressive friend's Twitter feed, and or it might have been the Drilled podcast, if you aren't familiar with that great podcast and website. Anyway, the internet introduced me to this term, and I really resonate with what Joyce was saying, where multi-solving, exactly what Joyce said, like, oh, right, that's the word for this thing that I've been looking for in the various types of action that I try to involve myself in, to find the best possible solutions to the challenges that we face. For those of you unfamiliar with multi-solving, at a very basic level, it's looking for singular interventions that have multiple benefits. And those multiple benefits need to bridge the climate crisis, but also social issues and in the way that I look at it, finances as well. And it was really helpful to come across the work of the Multisolving Institute and a great mailing list. If you're not already on their newsletter, check that out, because so many of the conversations that I've heard, honestly, over my lifetime about these sticky challenges and complex challenges that we're facing, they treat so many things in silos, and we can't afford to, because the systems and the mechanisms that are bringing us to problems around affordability, problems around the climate crisis, problems around social inequality, social determinants of health, all of those things, they have shared roots. And so, but instead of looking for the shared roots of these things, we're so often in our different sectors and silos, kind of hanging out around the outside branches of the tree, pointing at the apples, saying, there's a problem here. But again, they're connected. I really like the idea of multi-solving, and to the extent that I put it on it's one of the priorities that's listed on my campaign website, because I think it pairs really nicely with another tool that I really like, which is the triple bottom line approach to assessing decision making. Most people, when they hear the bottom line, they only think dollars and cents. They just think money. The triple bottom line says you've got to assess the costs and benefits financially, because you can't do anything if you're problem solving in a way that's fiscally irresponsible. We still live in a society where we need money to make stuff happen. But the triple bottom line says, on top of that, you need to add in, not as an or a but an and, like think of a nice tripod there for the photographers among us. You need to add the social and the environmental costs and benefits, because if we're not, and like, hello, the world around us, we've had a few hundred years of not accounting for social and environmental factors along with financial matters, and that has gotten us to the problems that we face now. It's not that these things have popped up independently and we just are seeing these problems at the same time. It's that so many of their roots are interconnected. And if we're going to make meaningful change in addressing them, then we need to be looking at getting, well, the most bang for our buck and not leaving people behind, and also making sure that we have a planet that is vibrant and biodiverse and livable at the end of the day. And if we're not doing that, then we're just not looking for the best solutions that are possible. Mad respect to, oh no, was it West? No, yeah, Grey Highlands for developing the Grey Highlands lens municipally, to, again, which is an example of looking for multi-solving tools. If you haven't seen the Grey Highlands lens, it's an expansion of the triple bottom line approach that they worked as a municipality to create with some university master's students, that hopefully can inform the council and the public to make sure we're talking apples to apples when we're identifying both the costs and benefits across a variety of sectors. I fear that I have gone beyond my allotted time, but I'm really excited about these ideas, and I'm so grateful to have a chance to talk about them with a variety of people. If any of you remember the good old uplifting novel 1984, in that world, the government takes away words so that the people don't have the ability to organize around these common ideas. They take away words like freedom, or they co-opt them. What this is doing is adding the word multi-solving to make us better able to address the challenges that are facing us. Let's throw it over to Jenny, because she's got the headphones. Back to you in studio.
Well, that makes me look like the boss or something.
Since you're running for council, Jon, how do you think multi-solving could help a council if they all got on board with this?
I think it's because it gets us to the best decisions. I think it brings us to that center point. Multi-solving lets us stand at the intersection of all of these concerns to help us on the financial side, get the best return on our investment, because we're saving money on each of the interventions by doing things that benefit those variety of sectors. And it brings together the diverse needs of people. So it lets us say, this is the most cost effective for the people who only care about money. It also lets us say, these decisions are better for everyone, socially or from a public health perspective. Seeing some faces from public health on the call, we might hear about that. And environmentally. And an example of multi-solving is something as simple as public transit. Public transit increases affordability on the individual level if people don't need to have a personal vehicle to participate in the life of their community and get groceries and get to work. It also gets people more active because they're walking to and from the bus stop and getting on and off. It connects people socially because there's that experience of community. It reduces congestion on roads. It lowers greenhouse gas emissions. It's just a good idea to get a better return on your investment, whether that investment is financial, social, or climate related.
My simple question, which doesn't necessarily require an answer right now, is though, for a municipality or a provincial government or even a business trying to solve problems that they have in order to be more successful, who, for example, whose job is it at the City of Owen Sound or a local municipality to manage the multi-solving flower, so to speak? Because my experience with it is that it's a complex thing to make all those connections, and often it's no one's actual job to make those connections and offer some kind of an answer to the question.
Is multi-solving a job, or is it a way of looking at the world? And that's the thing, right? Like, I don't know if any of you listen to the Canadaland or consume Canadaland podcasts. Great Canadian independent media company, and they did an episode a month ago about shitty roads, and because the design of our streets is another example where multi-solving is possible, and often we are not doing it. And they have a consultant at the end who's talking about, really, it's the difference between political will with whether governments are putting the best practice to use in street design, which can increase safety and reduce congestion and like all these things, have more trees so that it's easier to keep your buildings cool in the summertime, and biodiversity is supported. But it's not money that's the issue. It's mindset it's just mindset and commitment. So I think it's everyone's job if we're doing it right. But this is also part of the culture shift that we need, I think, humble opinion, that we need to be promoting, that we can support problem solving that's good for the greatest number of people, because it's good in all these ways. But yeah, I don't know, leadership, how does government work? Do we elect people for that? I think we do.
We try. Thanks, John. And there's another question from Gord Trimble here. John, are you aware of any local government that in Ontario that's using this concept, whether it's directly or indirectly actually using the word?
Not multi-solving specifically. The triple bottom line is an example of an approach that I would lump under multi-solving, and various municipalities across Canada are doing that, including Grey Highlands theoretically, but no, not specifically.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things that is of great concern to all of us in Grey and Bruce is the lack of thinking around sustainable development and more focus on sometimes irresponsible development. I just wonder, what does this approach bring to that conversation, and therefore the outcomes that some of the pressures for quick and dirty development bring to us? Just any thoughts on that?
I think this gives us a measuring stick to say what is helpful and what is not, and both to encourage commercial developers to, commercial developers are motivated by a specific thing, that is profit, and they have a set of practices that have been honed to increase profit while delivering the product that the market will accept. there are ways that we can ask more of developers, but we have to be asking more of developers. There are also folks who are trying to, and this might be a great segue, depending on what Madeline's question is, there are also folks who are trying to propose new ways to develop that take some of these ideas into approach, who may not be totally supported by or encouraged by the municipalities in which they're trying to develop their innovative projects. So it lets us say, what, like from my perspective, it gives us a clear measure to say, does this balance enough of the needs? Does this respond to enough different problems? And really, this is just one word that captures the sentiment of looking for win-wins or mutually beneficial outcomes.
What do you believe the power is of landing on the wording or the term multi-solving? And I'm finding it like fits kind of what Joyce said. It fits all of these kinds of different systems lens that organizers or activists or politicians or small scale business owners have used to make decisions, right? So yeah, curious around the power of that word.
I think that there's great power in being able to just say, hey, are we multi-solving with this? Or like, how does this, is this proposal multi-solving? How did multi-solving contribute to your plan for this development? Or because having one word to say, are you doing this complex interconnected analysis, I think is helpful just as a check, right? And it's also like, I also think it's catchy. I'm a bit of a word nerd. I think that it's the kind of thing that makes people say, oh no, like I'm not multi-solving, what is that? And it lets us start conversations and quickly reference complex topics.
There's one more question, and then I guess we should move along to Kelsey. And it comes from John Anderson. The Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing promotes the concept of a complete community as a way of promoting the livability of our communities. How does multi-solving intersect with promoting a complete community? A very interesting webinar on Ithaca's net zero plan. And they put right in their goals, along with achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, meet the electricity needs, etc. Their fourth goal was ensure benefits are shared among all local communities to reduce historical, social, and economic inequalities. So it's right there in their net zero plan because they foresee benefits, because it's a huge project that they're engaging in fast, lots of money is going to be spent. And they're actually building it right into the goals. And in fact, they're actually going to get people training, unemployed people and people who are living in the poverty line, et cetera, training to do some of the work that's going to happen during their net zero transformation. So that's one way I see, you can actually strategically include I actually ask, how many more benefits can we get out of this? And we'll move over to Kelsey. And Jenny, would you please go ahead and introduce Kelsey?
Sure. Kelsey Carriere is a neighbor up here in the northern part of Georgian Bluffs, which is great. She's great to have in our community. Kelsey grew up in Owen Sound and brings a background of environmental studies, community arts, and urban planning to her volunteer role as the chair of the Glassworks cooperative, which is an amazing project we're going to hear about among some other things maybe tonight from Kelsey. She's working to bring a model together for a sustainable, affordable, and I would say complete community at some level. So we'll hear about that from you, Kelsey, into Owen Sound, and folks will have heard about that, I'm sure. Kelsey's at so many tables for so many initiatives and projects that enhance the well-being of our communities, and particularly thinking about equity-seeking groups, which I think is always just so important in the work that we do moving forward for communities and for the planet. So she's got so many skills in her playbook, and she's such an asset, and it's so great that you could be here with us tonight. Kelsey, over to you. And please put your questions out there and challenge the conversation as you're sorting through your thoughts on multi-solving. Over to you, Kelsey.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that nice intro, and I'm honored to be here tonight and being able to chat on a panel with one of my favorite folks, Jon Farmer. And it's actually really interesting how recent we've all stumbled across this term of multi-solving, but how it sort of answers so much of the work that we've been doing for a long time, but haven't like quite been able to put our finger on it. And what I love about this concept is it takes complexity, which is, often thought of as a negative term. Complexity means added expense. It's going to take longer. We can't afford to do that. And it actually makes it so simple and so efficient and with so many co-benefits. I think of the way multi-solving sort of frames complexity as sort of like an organic natural state. Like if you were to look at a forest, an ecosystem, there's a lot going on there. There's like, if you were to try and understand the minutiae of every interaction of every microbe and every mineral and every animal, there's a lot going on there. But if you step back and you recognize the symbioses and the multi-beneficial roles at a system level, it's actually a very simple process. Everything has to go somewhere. Everything has to provide, has a benefit for another element of the ecosystem. And I think if we can sort of take that ecosystem mindset and apply it to our work, then we're not, following these shiny things and, reaching out, just trying to get, just financial efficiency or just solve one problem. And we're actually, I think, creating more efficient systems in the process as well. And so I like the idea of sort of using nature or an ecosystem as sort of a metaphor for what multi-solving can do to our framing of issues. And then sort of bringing in, I guess this is sort of paralleling the many chapters of my background. So that's the environmental studies sort of lens to multi-solving. But then also from the urban planning angle, obviously, urban planning is a mighty complex beast. There's, uncontrollable, not unplanned growth. There's, all sorts of social issues. There's transit issues, housing issues, that there's like no issue that isn't connected to urban planning if you're doing it right. But because of the way so many of our departments are siloed, it really makes it hard to collaborate. And because of that, we've sort of created this red tape around lots of our permit processes and what we're trying to allow in attempts to simplify, right? Because the issues are so complex, in attempt to simplify, we sort of put things in little boxes and write rules around them and have, this one process that we all know how to deal with one part of this complex issue. But in doing so, we've actually shot ourselves in the foot in a lot of ways and made it really tricky to solve complex issues because we've tried so hard to simplify the processes. So I can give sort of an example. Well, why don't I jump right into Glassworks, because we've been sort of hinting at it all along. So Glassworks, for anyone who's just hearing the name for the first time, is in essence affordable, sustainable housing cooperative project. And we've been talking a fair bit so far about development and how impactful unsustainable development is, not only locally, but at a global scale. And development, community development, it's such an incredible scope that it sort of gives us the ultimate opportunity to practice multi-solving. So when we first pitched the idea of Glassworks, there's so many of these issues that we were passionate to address, from climate action, reconciliation work, our affordable housing crisis, recognizing the growing number of seniors and our lack of services and housing to suit this growing population locally, employment issues, local food, health and wellness and well-being. And we were told at the beginning, no project can do all that. That's, people can't even understand it, it's too much. But as the project developed, thanks to multi-solving, we now know what we were doing, which is interconnecting all of these issues in a common solution, which is envisioning housing for the future that is both affordable, highly sustainable, and incorporates jobs, agriculture, working with Indigenous partners and like helping shift the way we live on the land, creating sharing systems that affects our consumption levels, working an ecosystem mindset, exactly, working local food production and active transportation into the project so that there's less need to rely on cars. And also be out and active and getting healthy. And it's also much more affordable to not have to own a car. So if we can create spaces where our populations aren't reliant on cars, that's actually an affordability issue. And I think one of the fascinating things for me about planning is, so we have zoning bylaws that says what can happen where. That was designed to make sure that we don't have incompatible uses. So this grew from, you can imagine, Industrial Revolution in Europe. There's these wild, like coal-fired factories with children working in them, and there's no sanitary sewage systems, and you know, can't breathe the air. Everything's like smoggy and filthy. And thankfully, the role of urban planners stepped in and said, hang on, we've got to get a grip on this because we're ruining our cities. We're ruining the communities and spaces where people live. And so we went around and carved out and said, okay, definitely factories are going to go over here, and then people will live over here. And well, schools, like institutions, that should be, you know, it's kind of a different land use. We'll separate that and separate retail, to the point that you get these funny patchworks in cities that forces people to drive everywhere. And it means that you don't live where you work, that you have to drive to see friends or to go to the theater or to amenities. But those zoning bylaws, I always joke that it's like only having 4 crayons in your coloring book, that that we haven't created the tools to be able to, at a community development scale or at a land use scale, really incorporate and say, yes, we can grow food where we live. Yes, of course we can work where we live. It's not going to be a coal-fired factory, you know, hiring children, and it's not going to be dumping its sewage right into the river. But we know that increasingly, the types of employment that we are relying on locally are highly compatible with our residents. And it really gives us an opportunity to rethink, and actually rewriting zoning bylaws is one of the key tools being used right now to address our affordable housing crisis, both at a provincial and a national level. And yeah, I think maybe I'll give one last little example before the clock ticks on me here. So there's an eco-village out in British Columbia called the Yarrow Eco-Village, and they had, you know, a similar scale property, had attempted to apply for building their eco-village that was part agricultural and part community, and the land was agricultural, and the municipality that had to approve their application said, well, the density of the houses that you're proposing it's too dense. It doesn't fit our zoning bylaw. And what the zoning bylaw was meant to do was to protect farmland. So there was like a minimum acreage that you could sever farmland to, and then have individual houses. But we all know that happens here too, that farmland gets purchased, carved up into the minimum acreage, and then, you know, just a country house built there, or maybe it's a hobby farm, but it's not actually creating or solving the problem of protecting farmland that it was meant to with that simple regulation. And what they did in Yarrow is the community managed to convince the city that we're actually protecting and actively using farmland to create local food and densifying the housings, which allows us to protect more farmland in the same process. So even though it went against the bylaw that was meant to protect farmland, this new idea that seemed like it broke all the rules was actually solving the problem better.
Lots of great examples. Really love the examples.
My question really is, how do we apply some of the principles and practices that exist within the Glassworks framework to other communities, to municipalities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we're starting to see municipalities adopting new tools like revisiting their zoning bylaws in order to help get us out of this affordable housing crisis. But in the process, if we're opening up opportunities to development and, really trying to trigger some movement there, sort of a crisis moment like that is always an incredible opportunity to sort of revisit your values and apply a multi-solving lens and say, what else do we need? Like a house, we don't just need housing. Like housing is always interconnected with transportation, with employment, with amenities, with food. Like it's, unless we're back to our 4 colors in our zoning bylaw coloring book and driving everywhere, the necessities of life are not disconnected. So I think it's a really amazing opportunity to actually challenge developers. And, you think about, we used to have lots of corner stores, for example, because people would be on foot and would want to walk to a corner store. So you would have in a residential neighborhood, someone that would convert their house into a business to meet a local need. And that kind of work has been sort of bylawed out of existence. But if we can recognize that, a corner green grocer or baker or coffee shop isn't incompatible, and really start to not only permit, but encourage and design for and zone for the kinds of mixed use neighborhoods that we know make a complete community. So maybe I can speak about the complete community concept for a moment. It's really quite a lot what it sounds like. It's really recognizing, kind of using a multi-solving lens, thinking of the everyday needs of folks and trying to figure out how to design our communities, our neighborhoods, our cities in a way that all of those components are readily available within a walking distance. There's a similar concept called the 15-minute city, which is a very simple idea to a complex problem of trying to design our cities in such a way that the majority of folks can meet the majority of their needs within a 15-minute walk of where they live. And the biggest key there is really to stop disallowing the things that we use and need on a regular basis from existing side by side. Of course, keeping those coal-fired child labor factories out of our backyards, but really recognizing that that the times have changed, and that with modern sanitation and with new kinds of employment, that mixed use and a complete community approach really is what is going to serve us in the future as we tackle our climate crises.
Great.
So there's a question, Joyce, that relates to just what Kelsey said there around the mixed use, right? From Gord around, are there not times when industry needs to be separated from residential housing?
For sure. And so like we said earlier, I think that this is again a language thing, right? It's not about employment lands or not employment lands, or industry or not industry. It's about compatible and incompatible. So you can actually, like, without changing the bylaw in its complete essence, you can change the measures. So instead of the measure being a list of types of businesses that can run on that land, it can measure the decibels or the pollutants or the traffic, because those are the real issues, right? It's not whether or not you manufacture something. It's really sort of taking a moment to refine why this regulation existed in the first place. What were we trying to accomplish? And can we revise, modernize that language so that it's actually accomplishing what we want it to do? Kind of going back to that simple example of preserving farmland, that, a very simple rule that's easy to follow doesn't always actually accomplish what it was meant to accomplish. It oversimplified and actually created the problem that it was trying to solve.
Yeah, thanks very much for that answer, Kelsey. I think you're right. I think rethinking, it seems like we've been stuck in the 1950s suburb and with the mall and the driving way of thinking for a heck of a long time. I'm just going to ask Reed, who put in the chat there, to explain maybe what he means by complete streets, or is that a term, Reed, that is basically the same thing that Kelsey's talking about?
Yeah, I think it's a related term in the sense of planning, where streets are seen as serving multiple kinds of users, walking, driving, transit, and cycling.
No, you're absolutely right, Reed. It's about sort of rebalancing and reallocating the different modes of transportation on the road. So it can mean like prioritizing transit to make sure that, it could be as simple as making sure that there's not big potholes in front of the bus stop so everyone gets soaked while they're waiting for the bus, but exactly making sure that that pedestrians, cyclists, transit, and cars and the local businesses are all sort of considered and their needs rebalanced. As we apply a more mixed use approach to our land use, and you can get to more and more places on foot or by bike or by transit, then there's less and less need for cars. And as there's less need for cars, then there's also less need to like a lot of these zoning bylaws are in relation to the traffic of like when you have a mall, it's because there's so many people going to the exact same destination. But instead of everybody driving to that one destination, if more people could meet their needs more locally, then the solutions kind of feed each other.
Those of you who read the Sun-Times may have noticed an article today that quotes heavily Jason Butler talking about how food insecurity is particularly a challenge right now. As we talk about complete streets and complete communities and multi-solving approaches, really, I think that if we dig down to the value that is at the base of this, it's that we care about quality of life for everyone and non-human relatives among that. And when we talk about quality of life, something like neighborhood stores, not like the affordability piece also connects to an idea called food deserts, where if you can't get to a place to get food in your immediate community, it means, and like good food, it means that you're limited to either traveling long distances, which are more expensive, or you're limited to the available nutrients at the corner store, which, as we've seen in the chat, is maybe not the highest pinnacle of food nutrition. At the risk of redirecting a meeting I am not running, may I suggest that Laura could speak to this?
I am not super familiar with this concept, but it makes sense when you hear it. I think a lot of times when I'm going into meetings and I'm talking to different people, we're trying to get collaborative action going. We come in kind of with our own perspective and our own biases, right? I'm coming in from the health perspective. I think it's really important, and I'm trying to convince others that it's really important. I can see this framework being really useful in helping everyone who's coming to the table kind of check their own perspectives, check their biases, and come into the meeting ready to talk about solutions that will work for everyone. So I love the idea of it. It sounds fantastic. When we're talking about corner stores and complete streets and all of that, absolutely, that's something that we have looked at for years with public health. I'm just going to be honest, we don't have a ton of food deserts in our area. We are a rural area, so for sure transportation is always an issue, but in our urban centers, it's not the greatest issue in Canada. But in communities where there isn't any public transportation and there isn't that infrastructure to support people in getting around, we do have to make sure that people can access food in some way and other essentials, whether it's getting to work or whatever. And I think if we were to use this approach, it would be a really fantastic way of looking at it. And yes, United Way did just hire their new food security coordinator, and that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to meeting them and working with them on that. And I think the other thing with the corner store's access that we really need to consider is that it does disproportionately affect certain groups, right? So it is a health equity issue at that point. If all you can access is a corner store because you don't have the transportation or you don't have any other options, then we are saying you can't access the food that you need to be healthy, probably. Go ahead, Kelsey. I saw the hand.
Oh, I just wanted to suggest there is such thing as corner stores that sell healthy food. By corner store, I didn't mean like gas station, convenience store that like, you know, often doesn't sell anything that's not junk food anymore, but the small, the local, the independently run that can meet community needs. So if the community is going to buy soup, they'll have soup stocked to sell to their community. Whereas
that's great.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm just thinking of the one and only store in Priceville. And they sell some pretty healthy stuff. As a matter of fact, I don't think they sell cigarettes. But anyway, Jon Farmer has brought up an interesting point in the chat, which is the social determinants of health, which is you know, yeah, really, I think that's what we're talking about, and what John Anderson maybe was talking about with complete community, the community that serves everyone. Maybe I'd like to call on, I know John Butler spoke to me about age-friendly communities, and he was on that the group that studied that for Grey County. John, are you there?
Hi, thank you for guiding me through the technology. I'd be delighted to say a few words about the age-friendly community, but I'd like to go a little bit beyond. And like everyone else on the line, I've been exploring a new concept, and in exploring it, I came across one particular sentence that struck me so profoundly that I've actually pinned it to my bulletin board, and it's from an article about multi-solving by Elizabeth Samwind from 2018, and she said, quote, "In the attempt to solve tough problems, the odds are high that no matter how smart you are or how hard you try, you won't make progress working on your own or even by working with people who think the way you do." And that line hit me with some real impact, because multi-solving is a way to deal with that hard nut of a problem within climate action. Secondly, in exploring the concept, I must admit that probably like everyone else on the line, I compare the concept with things that are already rattling around in my brain. And one of those things that rattles around in my brain, because I've used it extensively in my consulting practice, is the work of the Harvard Negotiation Project. That project, if you're not familiar with it, produced two fairly well-known books, one called Getting Past No and the other one called Getting to Yes. And to oversimplify the work of that project, it would be based on this premise that in going into a negotiation, don't start with your positions, start with your interests, because when you compare your interests with the interests of others around the table, you may well find that there are positions that will satisfy both your interests. I mention this only because those findings from the Harvard Negotiation Project fit, in my opinion, rather well with the concept of multi-solving. To say a word about the age-friendly community concept, earlier this year, Grey County and Grey Highlands both endorsed a county report called Final Age-Friendly Community Action Plan, February 2022. And that action plan, which will likely be considered by a number of municipalities in Grey County, it may be a fruitful area to apply the tenets of multi-solving. I won't get into details about the community action plan other to say than its vision statement is this, quote, "Grey County and its communities will create inclusive opportunities for people of all ages to actively participate in all stages of life and to thrive physically and economically with dignity and independence, close quote. That's followed by 10 goals and the amplification of those goals in the rest of the report. So for those who are looking for promising and looming opportunities to apply multi-solving, this may be one looming on the horizon. A couple of other points, if I could, in terms of connecting multi-solving with things that are rattling around in my brain. First of all, it's absolutely crucial, it seems to me, to learn from the specific lessons of projects like the Glassworks, and Kelsey's spoken very well about that today. But as well, one can also, I think, look at a macro level, and I think it's fair to say, and by the way, this is coming from a bit of a history buff, that if you look back at the three greatest social movements of the 19th century, that is the abolition movement, the temperance movement, and the women's suffrage movement, none of those actually accomplished their goals solely because of people who cared about the well-being of slaves, or people who cared about addicts, or people who cared about women's empowerment. They probably achieved what they achieved because there were other people whose interests were met by abolition, by temperance, and by women's suffrage. So in addition to drawing lessons that were so well expressed today by Kelsey, it probably would be instructive for us to look as a society at the past and how multi-solving solved social problems in the past. My last observation, if I could, is that there are probably people out there who, for very good reasons, would say, yeah, this sounds really interesting, but I can think of 5 or 6 or 7 or 12 instances where multi-solving has been tried and has failed, and they may be right in saying that. But my own personal answer, again, rattling around in my brain to that, is something I derived from the Catholic theologian Hans Kung in a book he wrote in the 1980s called Theology for the Third Millennium. And in that book, he said that paradigm changes only take place after a series of failed attempts to change the paradigm. But every failed attempt adds to the critical mass that's necessary to ultimately change the paradigm. So while a consideration of the concept of multi-solving may run into some troughs as people realize that it can sometimes fail as well as succeed, I at least can take solace in knowing that all of these attempts add to the critical mass to create the kind of paradigm change that I believe people on this line are necessary to get us to where we want to be. Thank you for letting me ramble on a little bit, and I'll turn it back to the moderator.
Well said. And I will remind people that actually it was Jon's Age-Friendly Community was one of the documents that where I saw lots of overlap with climate change and affordable housing. It was just, everything, the walking, the shade, the walkability, the density, the mixed use zoning, everything, it was a complete overlap. Now, a reminder that we do have the Jamboard, and maybe Lee, you could put the link up. The Jamboard question is, how will multi-solving impact your conversations about climate? We're always being told that really one of the most important things that we can do is talk about climate with people. So how can this approach help us do that in a better way? We have Madeline Marmor. Madeline, in your work, maybe you could describe what your work is and how multi-solving applies to what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Joyce. Yeah. Hello, I'm Madeline. I'm a farmer. I'm a first generation landless farmer who grows legumes, veggies, and flowers. A little bit of some livestock here or there in West Gray, just south of Hanover. I've been farming for 7 seasons and have found myself in this gorgeous part of the world for 2 seasons now. And I've used to come up to Sauble every year when I was a kid, and I feel very grateful to be able to be here in a different capacity. I also am wearing another hat tonight. I'm a part-time staff with the sustainability project and working on a particular project called Regenerate Grey Bruce, which is a 2-year project with a great amount of amazing funding, very grateful, thank you Greenbelt, to from the ground up, so co-created and co-written by community members in both Bruce and Grey County to create, a new story for this region that is based on the principle of regeneration. And what I mean by story is a narrative, or I like to think of it as science fiction. We have farmers like myself and my supervisor, Torsten, who some of you may know. We have scientists, we have, urban planners who are helping to kind of craft the science background, the biology background, the ecosystem background in terms of the science of the fiction. And the fiction is this, future that we're all writing together literally as we sit here. We're talking about multi-solutions, right? That's a forward thinking idea. Solutions is something about, thinking about the future. So it's a project that's very conceptual, right? We're bringing a lot of different strings together, and something that's still kind of unknown, which feels a bit shaky, but we have a lot of grace and patience and trust from the board. And so I think I wanted to address multi-solving, which I also just found out from Lee and in prep for tonight. And I'm like tingling because it feels like it has, kind of like Joy said earlier, fit something. Regeneration speaks to a process, a movement, an ongoing process that actually lives in our bodies, in our waterways, on our land, right? It's kind of this idea of healing in a forward motion, healing in a resilient way, and healing kind of to transform as well, right? So it has quite a bit of a positive connotation to it. Again, it is movement, it is a process, it's an ongoing thing. And so coupled with that is that the process of regeneration is located, as I mentioned earlier, in so many different places in our landscapes, in different little ecosystems, as forest floor will regenerate each spring. I believe, after really thinking about what a multi-solution may mean, is that the process of regeneration could be seen as a multi-solution. And maybe this will help by using an example. So as a farmer, I farmed, as farming, I've been in a few different spots. I'm very lucky to farm with a few different people and a few different counties. And one of the models I've farmed under is called a community supported agriculture venture, or CSA. Some of you may have heard of it before. Some of you are members of your own CSAs. And in short, what that term means, its origins are in the Japanese agriculture that was already kind of quite small scaled, independent, but also interdependent, as a very secure food system from, the idea of an island nation, was that kind of the community had much more stake, involvement, and in a sense, investment in the agriculture venture. So typically what CSAs look like in this part of Ontario is at the beginning of your season, let's say I'm the farmer and I have 3 shares, and I'm going to sell it to Lee, Kelsey, and Jon, and I'm going to sell those shares for $400. And my market window opens in February and they're sold by April. And Lee, Kelsey, and Jon will get produce for 20 weeks, starting when my spring greens, come up, let's say May 1. So at the beginning of my season, I have my income, which means I can pay my staff, buy my seeds, spend money on infrastructure at the beginning of the season, which is when snow is gone and you're like, oh, I have holes here, my tractor's not working there. I need to rehire someone because someone, has changed to work on a different farm. What I'm trying to kind of image out for you here is that some of those simple, I guess, benefits around the flower are addressed by using a CSA model. So I'm going to try to go back to that flower so I can remember. So jobs and livelihoods, in a way, by having the money up front, right? The farmers have made their wage. Farmers don't really pay themselves, so that's a kind of a side joke. But at the beginning of the season, when the money is in, the farmer can pay themselves, pay their staff, and not have to rely on a weekly farmers market or wholesale orders to pay their people. And that way, job security is much more likely in a CSA model. Climate protection, one of the big things that often the CSA model attracts are farmers and food growers who are growing in an ecological fashion. CSA farming is not inexpensive. It's often very small scale, and our agriculture sector is where it is, where, it's very similar to other sectors. And if, it gets cheaper if you get bigger. It's really hard to grow small. And so one of the things that's hard, and we know about this, and this is why multi-solving is so interesting to me right now, is that protecting the climate is not a cheap thing right now because it is so siloed. And because you're growing so much smaller scale, you can grow to what your land can accommodate. You're not growing more than your land's capacity. So it's really hard to narrow this one right down, because CSA model kind of goes hand in hand with climate conscious farmers, but they're not always tied together. So that's another point. Health and well-being, growing really beautiful food for, locally for folks to feed their families and feed their communities. We feed over 500 people from our farm's produce. We employ 5 people.
Thank you, Maddie. It's very interesting that you've taken the flower model, which we've been using in a kind of macro sense, and you applied it, on right directly to your area, which is the CSA area. So that's an interesting way of using the flower. It's somewhat different than what I was expecting. So thanks very much for that.
Well, my name's John Anderson, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm a retired scientist. A lot of people call me the science guy. Co-produced the film with Liz Zetland over 3 years ago now, and very much involved with our local CATs, our climate action teams. And Lee asked me to speak tonight a few words about the planning through the climate lens document that I prepared a few years ago. So this was 6 years ago. I developed a document titled Planning Through the Lens of Climate Change. And the purpose of the document was for our local groups, for our people, to simplify what climate action planning was and to summarize its key concepts. And I was motivated by 2 things in doing this. One was the consistent message I was seeing in the many municipal climate action plans that I had been reviewing across Ontario. And these were from small rural municipalities like Huron, Kinloss, and Bruce County to large urban municipalities across the greater Toronto and Hamilton area. The second motivation was in the many meetings I was participating in I was hearing the same questions about climate action being asked over and over again. So hence the document. It's a brief summary of the whys and whats of climate action. The document has been very well received. It's been shared widely. It has legs, as the saying goes. The key concept of climate action planning, and isn't in the document, is that a comprehensive and sincere climate action plan ensures that all decisions on every aspect of community living, working, and governance is done through a lens of climate. And in this way, you could think of it, the lens as the glue or the interconnectedness of what we are all talking about tonight as multi-solving. And in fact, you cannot get funding from Infrastructure Canada if you do not have a sincere climate action plan in place. This emphasizes the importance of climate planning for our infrastructure investments that are designed to withstand the next 40 or 50 years. Climate action planning acknowledges that the world we have known and lived in is quickly disappearing. Because of climate change, the future will be like nothing we have ever known in the past. And we're also at the beginning of the most significant industrial revolution in over 100 years. So we must incorporate and integrate this knowledge into all our planning. And this is what the document's about. As the graphic shows that Lee has tossed up, the document summarizes 6 key components that occurred in all these climate action plans I reviewed. And there were about 20 of them. And they're in no particular order because they're all important and they all integrate, but it's education. And that's something our cats, I think, can really get involved in as we go forward. Partnerships, we're not going to solve these issues by going forward in our silos. We need partnerships among all sectors. Transportation, built infrastructure, natural infrastructure, and last but not least is water and food security. So these 6 components are the core of what I have learned forms climate action planning. And of course, these are not the only components of a climate action plan, but these 6 components were in all the plans I reviewed. Climate action planning integrates across all 6 components. It integrates across different levels of governance, and it integrates across the corporate and community sectors. This type of planning acknowledges the interconnectedness of our environmental, social, economic, and cultural actors in building safe, healthy, and resilient communities. So that's what the document's about, and that's what its goal is intended to do.
Jon Farmer actually was mentioning the climate lens of Great Highlands, and a lot of that is trickled down from all of John Anderson's work. I want to make that clear, and that we're in good company here tonight.
Jenny has put an interesting question up here, asking Jon, so does effectively using the climate lens for decision making by definition require multi-solving?
Sure. I mean, like some of you, I wasn't familiar with the term, but when I went and looked it up and I went back and listened to Elizabeth Selwyn's, I realized this is what I was being taught back in the 1980s when I was at UBC by Buzz Halling and his group at the Institute of Animal Resource Ecology. It's an old concept. Giving it a new word, a new twist can shine a new light on something. But back then we called it adaptive management, and the team would send in a team of people to solve a problem, and it could be the spruce budworm problem in New Brunswick, or it could be a community in Switzerland wanted to build a new ski resort, and they solved the solution by looking at all aspects of it, and that's that multi-solving thing, and bringing in all the important actors, including everyone, and then key to the way my science would run it is they would then build models of this, and they would look at the outcome of decision making as you went forward, and in many cases what you would find were negative aspects of making decisions across that multi-solving, if you like, multi-solving spectrum. But through that, it's a learning process, and through that process of interaction, you ultimately make the best decisions going forward, and ultimately get to the goals that you're intending to do. So that would be my response.
As you were saying that, Jon, I sorry to just jump in, but I'm like so many of these models are presented as wheels, right? That there are so many things we're trying to balance. And if we think about the spokes of a wheel, if the goal is for the solution to roll, just as Jon was explaining, that sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I can't help but think that we've misbalanced things. And in the same way that a wheel that doesn't have the spokes quite right isn't going to do what you want it to do, the model isn't always going to work until we find that balance. And I think this language, whether we're using this way of seeing and weighing, whether we're using the adaptive management terminology of the 80s or multi-solving, because we're all really excited about that right now, like it's going to help us balance what we need to roll forward in a positive way.
Well said, Jon, and I like your analogy. And that's a realistic way of going forward, making good decisions about difficult and complex problems, the ones that are facing us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I see it strategically as a way to actually, at the very beginning, when you're goal setting, to see, you know, how many other, you know, problems can you address while you're trying to, I don't know, do something in Switzerland, set up a ski resort or something. How can this benefit the whole community? You know, like just try and build as much into it as you can. I see it as a nice, you know, strategic hacking. So that's very interesting, Jon.
And just to comment on that, like the important part is interacting with the community actors, and you bring everyone to the table, and it's, you know, it can be a challenging process, but through that back and forth, you ultimately make the best decisions. And you know, one example, you know, I like to draw on is the Grey County Climate Action Plan. You know, they had a number of community sessions and they had a lot of feedback, and they incorporated that into their plan. And I think it's a plan that many of us have now bought into. It wasn't the first version, had a lot of holes in it, but that process, and that's part of the climate action planning, is you don't just sit down with a bunch of experts and come up with your plan. You've got to involve your people. And that is ultimately how you do your multi-solving.
I totally appreciate everybody's perspective on the multi-solving piece. And having recently, I'll call it retired, but kind of stepped back from formal engagement in work that I've done over the years. My work has involved also community engagement, because with all those municipalities and levels of government, community engagement is a part of it. But my experience, and I can be honest at this point, is that the sincerity to get the kind of input as a lead priority is often not there. The real point of the process is to get the job done and move along. And in my experience, again, often it's the political leaders that are motivated to have things happen in a certain way. So that's my skepticism about community engagement and the success it can have to make real change in communities. Having said that, of course, there are great examples like the Grey County Plan that have done a fabulous job with community engagement, and I believe will maintain a relationship with the community because they've hired full-time staff to implement that. Often my work didn't involve full-time staff, but simply come in as a consultant and deliver the project, and then they've got a plan that sits on a shelf for a number of years and doesn't get implemented. So having said that, I think that the climate action planning, the multi-solving concept really does mirror what I've experienced over the years, and Jon made a bit of reference to that in terms of the word sustainability, because years ago I worked for an environmental group. That group changed its name to sustainability, recognizing the connection between economic, social, cultural, and environmental issues, and the importance of addressing each of those in a multi-solving sort of way. So I think, as Jon said, I agree it's kind of been a concept that's been around, but what I think is really good is the terminology that's being used around the circle in terms of resilience and biodiversity and health and well-being and the other topics the connection dot in the middle, to me, in the past would have been simply let's network, let's connect all the dots, and let's do things on the ground that benefit the whole circle. So I think the connection word is kind of replacing the networking word, but I still believe that that process of connecting with people around the circle is a really important piece. And often that's not the job of the person planting the tree or running the bike shop or doing an economic development plan or public transit or renewable energy or energy efficiency. A lot of the things that are under the multi-solving umbrella, or in the past were under the sustainability umbrella. So what I see as a real opportunity to parallel a lot of these topics, as well as the overarching need for making the connections, is the opportunity for jobs, to create new jobs. And Madeline's job with the regeneration project is a great example of a new kind of job that was created by a progressive group of thinkers, and it is on the ground work that is designed to really address some of these multi-solving issues, but have a positive impact on our environment and overall the climate. So I think that the other piece that's important I believe from a municipal, from a political perspective, is that economic development, in my opinion, seems to be a driver that can attract a lot of attention. If you can create jobs, if you can demonstrate positivity in terms of the economic health of the community, it does get a lot of support from a political perspective. So I think the trick, of course, is to maintain the connection with all those other flowers of the petal and assign what might be called ecosystem services, or some kind of a financial lens to this, so that those in decision-making powers make the right decisions. So it's a complex issue and requires multi-solving. So I appreciate the fact that I've kind of retired, but I'm glad to be part of this event tonight and look forward to further discussions to solve some of our community problems.
I think, Barry, you're right in saying this gets attention. This really gets people's attention. Yeah, go ahead, Barry.
Well, Lee has commented that jobs are on the multi-solving flower.
Right.
And I guess I would just, from an action-oriented perspective, I would use it as kind of a lead topic, especially if you're addressing municipalities and governments and things like that, because especially I will say in Ontario, jobs seem to be getting attention of the provincial government, at least as a lead. And if we can build in those multi-solving elements, then the jobs also have a positive environmental, social, cultural benefit.
Yeah, I have a loose end before we finish this little mini panel. There was a question way back about the social determinants of health. Sorry.
How does multi-solving reflect the considerations in the social determinants of health?
There it is.
Oh, yeah, quite easily, I think. The social determinants of health are really something that can't be solved on their own. They both impact people's health and also impact society itself, right? So when we're looking at the social determinants of health, we're never just looking at trying to solve one of them. We have all these tools at public health, like our health equity impact assessment, that I think could really easily be adapted to be a kind of multi-solving problem tool. And because what it does is it really encourages you to look at the social determinants of health and the different populations that could be disproportionately impacted by either something that you're working on or by setting a goal, and consider it from different angles. That may not be your intended angle, but look at it in different ways. And I think that's really what this is all about, is trying to really fully understand what we're doing and how we can make it so that we are collaborating in a way that everyone's getting what they need from our actions. So when we are looking at the social determinants of health, I think so often we are prioritizing the ones like income. But when we do that, and that brings in jobs and is really important in our conversations as we were talking about, but we need to make sure that we're considering all of them all at once, and then also bringing in our economic determinants of health and our commercial determinants of health and environmental determinants of health. I think we have frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals that we can look to and that draw in, and we could look at the Sustainable Development Goals and start asking our leaders, how are you going to use this approach to help our municipalities, our communities meet those goals?
I've learned a lot tonight, but I'm learning that whether you call it the multi-solving or whether you call it what Jon was learning in the 80s or whatever it means to you, like really what we're talking about is the opposite, what it's not, the opposite of silos, of working in silos.
I was thinking that in addressing complex issues, municipalities, governments, maybe us, maybe individuals, maybe climate action teams, we tend to partialize things and break them up into pieces and give them out in pieces. And that completely is antithetical to what we actually need to do, which is to integrate and what we're talking about tonight. So we've created silos in thinking that that's going to help make things easier and more straightforward. And Anne says systems theory. We're trained as social workers, Anne, and systems theory is all about all of this piece. You change one thing and it has an effect on a whole lot of other things. But it's time, it sounds as though it's time for us to really challenge our own siloing of pieces. And I mean, I could be guilty of that too and think, okay, well, I'm really here thinking about climate change. Well, tell me exactly what is affordable housing? Like, give me the link here, right? Because not all affordable housing is necessarily going to have a positive impact on climate. It's going to,
Exactly.
There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of nuance. So we really need to think about how we make these links and how we pressure to move into more integrative multi-solving approaches. So yeah, right with you, Lee.
Thank you, Anne, for mentioning systems theory. That was the basis of learning about the donut last year at about this time.
This takes it to much more of an individual level, which is, okay, so what does all this mean when I'm talking to my neighbor over a cup of tea or when I'm walking the dog and they say, oh, you're into that climate stuff, right? Like, what does this actually mean about how to have those conversations with people that may still be a little on the fence and we would like to engage them a little bit differently? So this is kind of the question we asked you for. What do you see, Joyce?
Wow, I don't know. So I read through them all, leaving no one behind. Everyone participates, talking across and through the silos. And silos are, I think, one of the impediments. And we haven't talked too much about impediments, but you brought it up, Jenny, just in saying that, yeah, we do silo things. And just because you're doing affordable housing doesn't mean that it's climate friendly housing. And so you got to have the lens. Makes climate action relative in our daily life in our region. Yes, absolutely. Makes climate action less partisan. That's true too. It's not just something that the Green Party's into. If we need affordable housing, I mean, every party can recognize that. Well, let's do it right. Let's keep the jobs, at home if we possibly can and benefit our community in every possible way.
And we have to keep on making those connections, Joyce, about every single issue in our community, right? Like that's the discipline, I guess, that we all need.
I think what's nice, you can actually meet people where they are, really, whatever their concern is.
Well, I think that's a big piece here. There's a few that relate to finding out what people care about, what do people think a healthy community is, right? And so that you have a starting place of hearing rather than offering the lecture or whatever. It's starting the conversation. What's that new one that just came up? Yeah, it's about our common future.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the climate engagement conversation, it widens it, it broadens it. It's very inclusive. Any action can be a climate action. Yes, even
That's
what
a good one.
what, yeah, even what you use to put your, pave your parking lot. Bring in players and planners and thinkers from even unlikely areas to work together. Yes, that's a wonderful one. That's what John Anderson's point about inclusive, and John Butler too, bringing in people with from varying walks of life and points of view, because they'll widen the conversation, and that's what multi-solving is, very wide. Ask what people care about and riff off of that. Is there will be a connection to multi-solving and climate if we bring that mindset to the conversation.
Well,
Yes.
in the end, isn't any issue that we're facing in the community, in a sense, a climate issue? I mean, I guess that's what that point is about. Any actions of climate action, potentially many problems and issues can be related to climate. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's true?
Let's do whatever we need to do in a way that's friendly to the climate. We're going to build housing. Let's make sure it's friendly to the climate.
I just want to say one intersection that we haven't talked about yet is the process of truth and reconciliation in Canada, and that when we think about the impact of siloing our responses, there's a long history in the North American conservation movement to silo the environment from people and from human and traditional land uses, and that when we think about bringing in then reconciliation in the Canadian context into that flower, we have to recognize the specific tension that has existed between the interests and needs and interaction with Indigenous communities and Eurocentric North American ideas of what protecting nature mean. Sorry, that just jumped up as one of the comments in the siloing component, and we started with a land acknowledgement, and so I think that as we move towards hopefully as a nation towards reconciliation and honoring the treaties and the agreements and also the worldviews that are Indigenous to this part of the earth, that there are particular connections to draw and to honor and strengthen in that.
Well said. And I think that if I've learned anything, it's that every time I've spoken to an Indigenous neighbor of mine or a friend, is that thinking holistically, like in multi-solving, thinking holistically is of the utmost importance.
It's all about the circle, right? That's how you bring people together to the circle to address the issue, right? It's a very different kind of approach to community concerns. What's happened to the circle? We've taken the circle out of our solution finding, and that's what we need to bring back, right?
Next month. Third Thursdays, November 17th. We're going to continue discussing affordable housing because, the Ford government announced they're going to build 1.5 million homes in 10 years. So we got to make room for all that. We're going to try and get some planners and some people with Bruce and Grey County to help us work through exactly what the plan is and how many trees it'll chop down, for lack of a better. We'll suss it out. But it'll be posted on our webpage, and we'll promote it as well. You'll get an email from us if you're on our mailing list. But that's something to save the date for us. The third Thursday every month. November 17th is next month, and it's called "What's the Plan?"
I was going to jump in earlier, John. I'm so glad you brought the conversation back to reconciliation, because I think that's one of the places where we have so much to learn. There are so many Indigenous experts in the realm of sort of future thinking and holistic thinking, and really sort of dismantling the systems that we've come to take for granted and can't even see we can't see beyond, for example, like private land ownership and, whether it's like zoning or taxation policies, that there's such an incredible wealth of knowledge of bringing traditional ways of knowing of how to live sustainably on this land, and so much to learn and so many experts out there. So thanks for bringing the conversation back there, John. I'm just super honored to be part of this conversation this evening. I know how much amazing work is going on in our area, and I think the platform that you're providing here to bring the conversation together in so many interesting and layered ways. I just shout outs to the whole team. And I'll just pop the Glassworks info in the chat for any folks that haven't explored it yet. And we're in the middle of a monthly sustainers campaign. The whole project has been funded by community members, except for a handful of grants that we're super grateful for our supporters. But yeah, please do check out the project. It's complex, yet simple in its ecosystem approach to really trying to address all of these issues of affordable housing, sustainable design, social isolation and community, local food, not solving them in one piece, but really incorporating them into a common solution at a community scale.
Folks, I'm so glad that this happens, not just tonight, but this whole series, and that dozens of people are interested in having these conversations locally about what we can do to try to make our little corner of the world the best that it can be. And as we saw the circle in the diagram, you can't do any of it in isolation, and none of us can do what we need to do in isolation either. And so I'm so grateful for all the networking and the knowledge sharing and the way that y'all bring each other together and your communities beyond this particular circle tonight. I'm not an expert in this. I'm just really excited about the idea and threw it on with Kelsey's help, a brochure and a website, because I think that whatever we call it, it's the way forward to address the challenges that we're facing. And yeah, and this feels like planting seeds, and seeds are hopeful. So I hope that as much as we've talked about really big things, and Jon's comment that like, hey, we talked about this in the 80s and we're still here today, might not be hopeful, but to echo Jon, the more we talk about it, the more we try to shake the status quo into a direction that is kinder to the world and the people in it and the non-human relatives that make up all of our ecological systems. Like, we're doing the work. So thank you for doing the work. And I'm just so grateful that I had a chance to jump on here and take maybe too much mic time. Much gratitude. And voting day in Ontario is October 24th. So wherever you are, vote.
Jon has added this also, gives us a way to ask the best of our leaders. Definitely. I'm thinking about that this whole time, because of course we're on the eve of the municipal election almost, and thinking what do we ask of our leaders, and the municipal level is so important these days.
Thank you so much to Joyce Hall, Joy, for coming to us with this suggestion. I'd like to encourage anyone, if they have a suggestion of the climate forum, to come to Jenny and I, and we'll make it happen.
It is really heartening to know so much is happening. There's so much good thinking going on, and well, we'll have lots to talk about after the election, and we'll just keep this ball rolling.
Yeah, everybody volunteers, so we really appreciate it. It's all just grassroots. It's all, we just do this inspired by resilience and Liz Zetlin and all that. So this is still just a trickle down of Jon and Liz's effort with resilience, and credit is give credit to where credit is due. We'll see you next month. And Jenny.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
It was a great conversation.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.